Tonight, we feature Ada Limon, the author of 5 books of poetry, including The Carrying, which won the National Book Critics Circle Award for Poetry and was named one of the top 5 poetry books of the year by the Washington Post. Her 4th book, Bright Dead Things, was named a finalist for the National Book Award, a finalist for the Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award, and a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award. It's my pleasure to welcome Ada Limon.
Hi. Happy to be here and be part of this important project. I'm going to read a few poems. My name is Ada Limon, and it's an honor to be among this group of talented, marvelous women. How to triumph like a girl. I like the lady horses best, how they make it all look easy, like running 40 miles per hour is as fun as taking a nap or grass. I like their lady horse swagger after winning Ears Up Girls, Ears Up. But mainly, let's be honest, I like that they're ladies, as if this big, dangerous animal is also a part of me. That somewhere inside the delicate skin of my body there pumps an 8-pound female horse heart, giant with power, heavy with blood. Don't you want to believe it? Don't you want to lift my shirt and see the huge, beating, genius machine that thinks, no, it knows, it's going to come in first? These are lessons from animals. Another lesson from an animal. Service. Somewhere outside of Albuquerque, I was all fed up with the stories about your ex-girlfriend's guest billboard in New York City. And to make matters worse, I had to pee like a racehorse or like a girl who'd had too much to drink way too far from home. You stopped at a friend's body shop to talk about a buddy who was stuck someplace in Mexico. You were talking pulling strings and taking pulls off a brown bottle, and no one told me where the restroom was. So I walked back to where the hot rods were displayed like dogs ready for a fight, baring their grills like teeth. I was hungry. The air smelled like hot gasoline and that sweet carnation smell of oil and coolant. A girl pitbull came and circled me as I circled the cars. She sniffed my ankles like I was her kin or on some kind of rescue mission. You were still talking, not a glance in the direction of me and the bitch working our ways around the souped-up Corvettes and the power tools. The pit was glossy, well cared for, a queen of the car shop. And when she widened her hind legs and squatted to pee all over one of the car's dropped canvases, I took it as a challenge. That strong yellow stream seemed to be saying, "Girl, no one's going to tell me when to take a leak, when to bow down, when not to bite." So right then, in the dim lights of the strange garage, I lifted my skirt and pissed like the hard bitch I was. It's a true story. Another poem from this book. The Other Wish. Nights I wonder about the sanity of Icarus. Wax and wings both wasted on the sun's scorch. If I'd a handmade fanned out feather set, me, I'd choose the moon. always the sister moon, cold, comely queen of the sky, pockmarked with craters, pummeled by meteors and still shining. Imagine that gathering on the shore, you holding my coat for a warm comeback. We mean a thing is impossible when we say we're shooting for that great orbital puller. How hard can you glow? Asks the owl's eye. What radiant part of you wishes to dynamite? I used to think it was like a light bulb, life, dangling in the chest, asking to be switched on. But it's not the light that's ever in question. Rather, what's your brilliant, glaring wattage? What do you dare to gleam out and reflect? If I were to fall, sabotaged wax, torn pinion, I'd want to fall from the terrifying height of her. The dust of my years, crazy and flashing, lit up by the victory of my disastrous flight. Poems for the moon. I'll read a poem about what I think of this song. A new national anthem. The truth is, I've never cared for the national anthem. If you think about it, it's not a good song. Too high for most of us with the rocket's red glare, and then there are the bombs. Always, always, there is war and bombs. Once I sang it at homecoming and threw even the tenacious high school band off key. But the song didn't mean anything, just a call to the field, something to get through before the pummeling of youth. And what of the stanzas we never sing? The third that mentions no refuge could save the hireling and the slave. Perhaps the truth is every song of this country has an unsung third stanza, something brutal sneaking underneath us, while we absent-mindedly sing the high notes with a beer sloshing in the stands, hoping our team wins. Don't get me wrong, I do like the flag, how it undulates in the wind like water, elemental, and best when it's humbled, brought to its knees, clung to by someone who has lost everything, when it's not a weapon, when it flickers, when it folds up so perfectly you can keep it until it's needed, until you can leave it again, until the song in your mouth feels like sustenance, a song where the notes are sung by even the ageless woods, the short grass plains, the Red River Gorge, the fistful of land left unpoisoned, the song that's our birthright, that's sung in silence when it's too hard to go on, that sounds like someone's rough fingers weaving into another's, that sounds like a match being lit in an endless cave, the song that says, my bones are your bones, and your bones are my bones, and isn't that enough? Thank you.
Reyna Grande is the author of memoirs The Distance Between Us and A Dream Called Home, and novels Across 100 Mountains and Dancing with Butterflies. Her books have been adopted as the common read selection by schools, colleges, and cities across the country. Reyna has received numerous awards, including an American Book Award, the El Premio Aztlán Literary Award, and the International Latino Book Award, finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award, and a Luis Leal Award for Distinction in Chicano Latino Literature. The Young Readers version of The Distance Between Us received an Honor Book Award for the Americas Award for Children's and Young Adult Literature, a Eureka Honors Award from the California Reading Association and an International Literacy Association Children's Book Award. It's an honor to bring to you Reina Grande.
A Migrant Story. Every year, millions of monarch butterflies migrate from Canada to Mexico, where they spend their winters. They face many perils along their nearly 3,000-mile journey: unpredictable weather, pesticides, low supply of milkweed, loss of habitat. Despite the traumatic experiences before, during, and after the journey, the monarch knows that its migration is the only way to ensure the survival of the next generation and the next. As a former undocumented immigrant, I have long admired the monarch butterfly's will to live. For the monarch, and for me, and for the millions of people in the world forced to leave their homelands, migration is an act of survival. The monarch butterfly has become a powerful symbol for the undocumented immigrant community. It serves as a reminder that every living thing on earth deserves to thrive in peace and harmony, that for both insect and human, migration is not a crime, but a necessity. In my garden in Los Angeles, I planted milkweed and other flowering plants to provide a safe haven for the local monarch population and do my part to protect this magnificent creature. I shared my love of gardening with my daughter Eva, who was 7 years old at the time of this story, and while we weeded or planted bulbs, I would talk to her about the plight of the monarch population. I told her that 20 years ago, over 1 billion monarchs would make the journey south. Now their numbers are at the lowest they've ever been. As with all migrants, their struggle to survive is harder today than ever before. We humans are plowing away more and more land and leaving no room for milkweed or nectar plants, spraying harmful pesticides on our farmlands, and cutting down the forests where the monarchs spend their winters. Something needs to be done, I told my daughter. Eva said that she would grow up to be an entomologist. I'll save the monarchs, she declared. She squealed in delight every time a butterfly visited our garden. I explained to her that they were laying eggs in the milkweed we had planted for them. When we watched a documentary about butterflies, Eva could no longer wait until she grew up to save them. She had to start that very day with our local population. She wanted to carry out a rescue mission to save the monarchs from the only threat she could see in our pesticide-free garden: predators. Eva and I began to gather the milkweed leaves that had tiny eggs attached to their underside and put them in containers, safe from the spiders and praying mantises that lived in the garden. Once the caterpillars were grown, we transferred them to a butterfly habitat where they pupated before our eyes. Those 3 minutes of watching a yellow, black and white striped caterpillar transform into a brilliant emerald green chrysalis were magical. We gasped at seeing the tiny gold spots and a golden ring shimmering around the chrysalis. Eva kept a journal where she wrote down every detail, and she learned to predict when the butterflies would be born. During the next 10 days, we watched in awe as the chrysalis became transparent until we could see the black and orange butterfly nestled within. We released the new butterflies in the garden the same day they were born. To Eva, every butterfly was a girl, and she always gave them names. We would wave goodbye and wish them a safe journey.
Bye!
Bye, butterfly. Standing beside my daughter, I felt connected to her through the shared experience. We had been part of the cycle of life of this precious insect and bore witness to its metamorphosis. One September day, one of the caterpillars did not attach itself securely enough to the roof of the butterfly habitat. In the middle of pupation, the chrysalis fell to the floor, and when we found it, one side was flat. My daughter and I used tape to hang the cocoon as carefully as we could, but when the monarch emerged from its chrysalis, its right wing was shorter than its left. "I'm afraid we can't release it," I told my daughter. "She won't be able to fly." A healthy monarch had a difficult road ahead of her in her fight for life. A monarch who couldn't fly was doomed. "I will teach Buttercup to fly," Eva said. I didn't have the heart to tell my daughter that it was not possible. How could a human teach a butterfly to fly, especially one with a severe disability? Every day, Eva would take Buttercup out to the garden and place her on the butterfly bush to drink nectar and enjoy the sunlight. She would sit Buttercup on her index finger and raise her hand up and down to get wind under Buttercup's wings. Buttercup would take off into the air, only to fall seconds later. Eva would pick her up from the grass and try again. For several days, Eva put up fresh orange slices for Buttercup, and when the sun had warmed the garden, she would take her out to eat nectar and practice flying. I watched from the window, wondering how to prepare my daughter for the inevitable. Buttercup would spend the rest of her too short life with us. She was never going to fly. This butterfly, like me, had been born to struggle, something that my children knew nothing about. I had been born with a great disadvantage too. An undocumented child immigrant from Iguala, Mexico, in the state of Guerrero, where 70% of the population lived in poverty. No one thought I could escape the circumstances I had been born into, but I had. Just like the monarch leaves her home to give her offspring a chance, I have left the country of my birth, risked my life to cross the border, and made the impossible possible. I went from being an undocumented immigrant to a successful published author. Because of my own migration to seek a better life in the U.S., I spare my children the trauma of being born in a shack made of sticks and cardboard, living without running water, walking around barefoot for lack of shoes, being hungry in every way. I spare my children the trauma of running across the border, the paralyzing fear of being caught and sent back, or worse, of perishing in the act of crossing. My children will never know what it's like to be labeled a criminal for simply wanting a better future, a chance to dream. They will never know the stigma of growing up undocumented, the trauma of trying to hold on to your roots while trying to assimilate into a new culture. They won't know the searing pain of a heart as it cleaves in two, fighting to maintain its Mexican identity while transforming into an American. Like my story, the monarch's is one of struggle and survival. As I watch my daughter share the fight with Buttercup and learn of perseverance and faith, I hope that her love for this butterfly would be the magic formula that would help Buttercup fly. A few days later, from the living room window, I watched my daughter do her usual routine. When she placed Buttercup on her finger and raised her hand up and down, Buttercup took off and soared into the air. I was expecting her to fall back down, but this time she didn't. She flew across the garden and over the neighbor's fence. I rushed outside and watched as Buttercup disappeared from sight. Eva's face was full of triumph and pride. "She did it," Eva said. "She flew." "She did," I said. "She really did." I don't know where Buttercup ended up. My daughter believes that her butterfly defied fate and went on to have a fulfilling life. I was happy to know that at least for this one moment, my daughter might have had a glimpse into my life. She witnessed firsthand what it's like to rise above the circumstances one is born into and find the strength to survive.
Tonight's featured artist is Rita Dove, Poet Laureate of the United States and consultant to the Library of Congress from 1993 to 1995, and Poet Laureate of the Commonwealth of Virginia from 2004 to 2006. Her publications include The Yellow House on the Corner, the verse novel Thomas and Beulah, which won the Pulitzer Prize and was staged as an opera by the Museum for Contemporary Art in Chicago, On the Bus with Rosa Parks, a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award, and Sonata Malatika. She has received numerous literary and academic honors, among them the Pulitzer Prize in Poetry and the Emily Corrick Leadership Award, the Duke Ellington Lifetime Achievement Award, the Heinz Award in the Arts and Humanities. President Clinton awarded her the 1996 National Humanities Medal, and President Barack Obama presented her with the 2011 National Medal of Arts, which made her the only poet with both the National Humanities Medal and the National Medal of Arts to her credit. To date, 28 honorary doctorates have been bestowed upon Rita Dove, most recently by Yale University, Smith College, Harvard University, and the University of Michigan. Our sister Scheherazade and co-founder of the Scheherazade Project, Julia Alvarez, will be introducing Rita Dove's performance tonight.
This is Julia Alvarez, co-founder with Lisa Labo of the Scheherazade Project. We're very grateful to welcome our sister Scheherazade, Rita Dove, presenting her poem Parsley tonight. This poem documents a little-known massacre that occurred in the Dominican Republic in 1937, in which Haitians and Dominicans of Haitian descent were brutally murdered by the dictator El General Trujillo's henchmen. The killings began early October and continued for 2 weeks. Historians differ on the exact number of casualties, from a conservative 6,000 to 20,000 killed. Many terrorized men, women, and children would claim to be Dominicans to avoid being slaughtered. So a litmus test was devised. A sprig of parsley was held up for would-be victims to identify. If they mispronounced the word, a Haitian Creole speaker would not trill the R as a Spanish speaker would. The man, woman, or child would be decapitated or stabbed or bludgeoned to death. El General soldiers had been ordered not to use ammunition so that the killings could not be traced back to his regime. The massacre is known as the Parsley Massacre for this reason. I first found out about this part of my history early in the 1980s in this country when I read Alfred Hicks' Blood in the Streets, and soon thereafter Rita Dove's moving poem, Parsley. It's now 83 years since the massacre, and still the Dominican Republic has yet to openly and honestly address or adequately redress this crime against humanity. So in 2012, a group of us diaspora Dominicans and Haitians, in solidarity with other supporters on both sides of the border, began a movement called Border of Lights. Every year, On the anniversary of the massacre, we gather at both sides of the border, hold workshops, town meetings, engage in binational community projects, educating students and citizens on a part of our history that has been erased. On one night, we hold a special vigil and line up on the border with candles, songs, poetry, call and responses with our Haitian counterparts on their side of the border, in order to commemorate the dead and affirm our commitments to peace, solidarity, social justice between our two countries. This year, with a pandemic preventing travel and a curfew on the ground, our vigil is virtual, and it's happening tonight, October 10th. After watching Rita Dove's presentation, please join us at Border of Lights. Just a few minutes of your time to post a comment, a photo of a candle, a flashlight, stars, any light, as a way to affirm that Black lives matter beyond as well as within our borders. So it's especially meaningful for me as a Dominican American to welcome Rita Dove tonight, reading her poem Parsley as the Border of Lights vigil commemorating the massacre she so movingly writes about is taking place at the same time.
Parsley, the cane fields. There is a parrot imitating spring in the palace, its feathers parsley green. Out of the swamp the cane appears to haunt us, and we cut it down. El General searches for a word, he is all the world there is. Like a parrot imitating spring, we lie down screaming as rain punches through, and we come up green. We cannot speak an R. Out of the swamp the cane appears, and then the mountain we call in whispers, Catalina. The children gnaw their teeth to arrowheads. There is a parrot imitating spring. El General has found his word, perejil. Who says it lives. He laughs, teeth shining out of the swamp. The cane appears in our dreams, lashed by wind and streaming, and we lie down. For every drop of blood, there is a parrot imitating spring. Out of the swamp, the cane appears. The palace. The word the general's chosen is parsley. It is fall, when thoughts turn to love and death. The general thinks of his mother, how she died in the fall, and he planted her walking cane at the grave, and it flowered, each spring stolidly forming 4-star blossoms. The general pulls on his boots. He stomps to her room in the palace, the one without curtains, the one with a parrot in a brass ring. As he paces, he wonders, who can I kill today? And for a moment, the little knot of screams is still. The parrot, who has traveled all the way from Australia in an ivory cage, is coy as a widow, practicing spring. Ever since the morning his mother collapsed in the kitchen while baking skull-shaped candies for the Day of the Dead, the general has hated sweets. He orders pastries brought up for the bird. They arrive dusted with sugar on a bed of lace. The knot in his throat starts to twitch. He sees his boots the first day in battle splashed with mud and urine as a soldier falls at his feet, amazed. How stupid he looked at the sound of artillery. I never thought it would sing, the soldier said, and died. Now the general sees the fields of sugar cane lashed by rain and streaming. He sees his mother's smile, the teeth gnawed to arrowheads. He hears the Haitians sing without R's as they swing the great machetes. Catalina, they sing. Catalina, mi madre, mi amor le muerte. God knows his mother was no stupid woman. She could roll an R like a queen. Even a parrot can roll an R. In the bare room, the bright feathers arch in a parody of greenery as the last pale crumbs disappear under the blackened tongue. Someone calls out his name in a voice so like his mother's. A startled tear splashes the tip of his right boot. My mother, my love in death. The general remembers the tiny green sprigs men of his village wore in their capes to honor the birth of a son. He will order many, this time, to be killed for a single beautiful word.
Tonight's featured artist is Carla Rachel Samuth, author of the memoir One Day on the Gold Line. An essay included in her memoir, If This Is So, Why Am I?, was listed as a notable in Best American Essays 2019. She was recently selected to be a 2019 Pride Poet, participating in the City of West Hollywood's One City, One Pride LGBTQ Arts Festival. Carla is a member of the Pasadena Rose Poets, who present poetry within reach and in unexpected places. It's a pleasure to bring to the hashtag 101 Night screen, Carla Samuth.
Mother's Day Triptych. 1. Photo. The photo is of my son Raphael as a newborn. The bright royal blue color of the onesie complements his looks. Like now, his look is racially and culturally ambiguous, similar to the rest of our family. His eyes dark, almost black, his hair barely curly, brownish, which will get darker and thicker and curlier as he grows. At birth, there is a bit of blonde, like me. For a second, family lore has it that my mom called out when I was born, "Oh my God, the milkman, a blonde," in a family of dark-haired, olive-skinned people. My hair got darker later too, but I never turned as dark as my siblings, who are closer to Raphael's color. Later, he will more closely resemble my dad at the same age. His skin grows into a beautiful brown, café au lait kind of color. His nose strong with high cheekbones, a possible look of Ethiopian, Afro-Latino, Middle Eastern, African-American, or maybe Jewish. They just want to know if you're Jewish, my mom always said. And the reality is that we Jews come in all colors, from many different countries. I once had to explain this to Raphael's high school math teacher, who asked him to draw a pie chart of where he was from. "Just help me do it," he said, impatient. Instead, I emailed his teacher explaining that the very history of African Americans and Jews make it difficult to do this assignment. Raphael is an Afro-Jew. As a newborn, he looks quizzical, as if he can't quite decide whether to be in this world or not. He peers at us, his parents, with a suspicious-looking glance that suggests that he feels little confidence that these people can care for him in the outside world. We struggle to swaddle or change a diaper. He came into this world seeming to want to crawl back into the womb. I, however, was smitten. The connection I felt when I held him in my arms is the same feeling I want to evoke with the tattoos we get one Mother's Day when he is 22. I know it sounds a bit like the identically dressed mother-daughter punk rockers we made fun of back in the day, not in front of them, of course, who showed up in court when I worked for the Family Violence Unit at the Seattle City Attorney's Office. But yes, we're getting matching Celtic tribal type symbols of mother and son. This tattoo is better than if I'd branded him at birth with "I love my mom" on his butt and watched it grow. Here is the mom holding the baby, so symbolic many people can't tell what it is if they don't look at the exact right angle. The tattoo artist adds a little dot for the heart beating. When I see my tattoo or his, all the shitstorms of anxiety I experience sometimes float away like dust into the air, and I'm solid. 2. Object. When my son is little, we gather smooth white stones to skip. Only the good ones work for us, but the other ones still feel comforting, nestled in our palms. When he is 14, he asks me why we stack stones on the graves of our loved ones and writes a story about zombies to explain it after my dad's unveiling. A year after someone dies in Jewish tradition, you gather together for the unveiling of the tombstone. Stones are placed around it when you visit. A prayer is said. A meal is usually partaken. My son is not yet 21. My wife and I get married in the fall before I go with her on a Coast Guard deployment to Connecticut. She is my second wife, my third marriage. The first was to my son's dad. A year before, knowing my son loved her and said she was a badass, I still decided we needed to wait. Even though I sometimes thought, how could I let this one get away? I resisted a quick lesbian U-Haul move in our marriage. When I told him, my son understood. He knew why I said, I have to get it right. We've seen too many losses. Have to make sure this one takes. She's too controlling sometimes. That's how I felt then. I have learned that for her, what feels controlling at times to me equals keeping me safe, equals love. And her love for me is unequivocal. A generous, loyal type of love I'd vowed never to walk away from if I found it again. I'd once had this with my big-hearted boyfriend, Henry, in Seattle. But not being ready yet, I ran. The safety I would long for later felt at the time claustrophobic. His big Filipino family and my big Jewish family felt like too many demands and too much familiarity. Later, I missed their constant embrace and our sprawling extended families. One day I drive to Moonstone Beach, about an hour from where my wife is temporarily stationed in Connecticut with the Coast Guard. A friend, Katja, has asked me to bring her back a moonstone, so I go on a grim, rainy spring day to gather these mythical stones. These stones are magical, and each one means something different, a grainy old woman on the beach tells me. They are smooth and tender-hearted stones, and I gather up a sackful. This is the first time in my adult life that I don't have to work for an extended period of time, that I'm not working, studying, or momming, but am gifted this time to write or recuperate from life, to binge-watch Marc Maron and Orange is the New Black and eat Rocky Road ice cream with my wife. I gained so much she's 6 months away while my wife is on a temporary deployment, including about 10 pounds. She works on the base, and I have my repos, my sabbatical. But what is lost at the end of those 6 months? On our trip back to the West Coast across Canada, just before we enter the long ride through the Canadian prairies, I hear my wife and son scream at each other on speakerphone. He is across the country in California. Stop yelling at me, he shouts as she blows up, telling him what it is he hasn't done. I am undone. I told you to get the paperwork. You can't drive my car without it. She's given her car to my son, but he needs to transfer it to his name, his own insurance, and he isn't moving fast enough. We are moving in our car in Canada. He is driving her car in Los Angeles. I am petrified, like wood. I have nothing to grasp a hold of. As I scream and plug my ears in ancient response to trauma, she shouts, I'm done with you both. I can't reconcile that image with the loving family I thought I'd finally got. After this, after that, I can't even list all that was lost in previous versions of blended and unblended family. I am deposited with my suitcase by the side of the road. I crawl into the overgrown brush, past a train track, and dry swallow a handful of Ativan, phone dead. My wife drives away and comes back. I pee. I wonder how I went from holding that blue-shirted, dark-eyed baby in the picture to me standing in the middle of knee-high weeds in the Canadian prairie. I comfort myself singing old Hebrew melodies from Shabbat at the Jewish socialist camp I once went to, though I don't think it is Friday night. My wife has pulled back up by the side of the road, waiting for me. I don't remember how I got back in the car, but I end up inside. She must have put the seatbelt on me. I have few memories of the next 3 days. The handful of pills took care of that. Tell me that you'll fix this with him. You'll apologize. You'll make it right. Swear to it, I say in between dozing. Yes, yes, I told you I will. She keeps driving. Over the next years, I try to retie the knot, to imagine a world without ruptures. Me, my son, my wife, his stepmom. One night when we are back home, I fall asleep after a rough night with my wife. A fight that guts and exhausts us until all we can do is spoon, and in my free hand, I hold that stone. The other hand holds her breast, as always. Each time I wake up, the moonstone is still clenched in one hand. Her breast in the other. 3. Place. It's the point. The point on Gabriel Island, BC, where I went when I was a teenager to the Jewish socialist Habonim camp run like a kibbutz. They taught us Marxism and labor history. Every Friday night, we'd clean up real good, wearing our best clothes. The point was where you walked hand in hand with your best camp friends to whom you'd told your whole life story, and maybe you got to walk arm in arm with the guy you had the crush on, who might someday kiss you, or not. It's the music that comforted me for years, that I sang to myself when violent screaming from family or boyfriends, a husband or a wife, pierced my heart, that I thought was finally safe. Those Shabbat melodies. I like the tunes, one old Jewish man, highly secular, said to his daughter, the red diaper baby. I too like the tunes. They rock me and wrap me with a warm, slightly sour, milk-smelling blanket like the one I wrapped my child with. I sang lullabies as I rocked with him each night, so tired I believed that the next day would be better, but nothing would be as good as that moment, his lips to my breast, his soft sucking sounds and sighs, me falling asleep with him in the rocker, our breath together like the Spanish and English that mixed, where I couldn't tell which language I dreamt in or spoke in. I couldn't tell where he left off, and I began. My son is almost cooked now, 23 years old. A young man that towers over me and says, Mom, I love you so, so much. We are tethered, sometimes infecting the other with our anxiety or our worries. But we can talk about it, this transmutation of pain. And now we're marked irrevocably with our matching tattoos, my shoulder, his forearm. My wife spoke to me about possibly getting a tattoo for the first time, a matching one with me, but quickly lost interest. The money, the time, not a priority. We talked about a vine, perhaps a bougainvillea or an orchid that would stretch from one part of my body to hers, a shoulder to a thigh. I long for something that will somehow bind the three of us together, me, my wife, and my son. They seem to be less attached to the idea, this desperate need of mine to find a container for the three of us that is safe, strong, undivided. They appear to accept the occasional bumpiness of their relationship in a way I struggle to, since I still cling to safe harbor, a place like the Point where ocean waves give the sense of calm with their consistent return. My son has told me that he is glad that my wife and I have found each other, knowing that I am taken care of. And my wife knows that the love between my son and me burns fierce and constant. Perhaps the thread that holds us together is their unyielding love for me, and mine for them. That is the place we will live in. Thank you.
Henny Wenkart is a 92-year-old poet and retired philosophy professor. She was born in Vienna, Austria in 1928 and fled the Nazis in 1939 with a group of 50 children sponsored by a Philadelphia Jewish congregation. That escape is the subject of a WETA documentary, 50 Children. She was ultimately reunited with her parents in the United States. She was also editor of the Jewish Women's Literary Annual and has published her poetry in a variety of journals and in a collection titled Poems of a Philanderer's Wife. She now lives in a center for senior living in Chelsea, Massachusetts, near 3 of her 5 grandchildren, where she's fixin' to get ready to complete a novel. I bring to you Henny Wenkart.
So I'd like to introduce you to my mother. This is Henny Wenkart. And Mom, could you please tell us a little bit about your childhood?
All right. I was born in Vienna, and we lived for most of the time in a very beautiful neighborhood in what is the 9th District, which is a very fancy neighborhood. My father was a lawyer, and
when were
he
you
had an office in a very fancy office building called the K Palace, overlooking the Danube Canal.
Mom, what year were you born?
What?
What year were you born?
I was born in 1928.
And what happened when you were 10 years old?
When I was 10 years old, Austria was annexed by Germany, by Adolf Hitler. And the Austrians were very enthusiastic. They like to say now that they were invaded by Germany, but in fact, they were very enthusiastic for Hitler. I remember when the day that the annexation occurred, already there were long banners with swastikas on them hanging from all the buildings, and all the people had little buttons with Hitler's picture. And the stores weren't even open, so they couldn't have bought them then. They must have already had them before. And they had armbands with swastikas on them. And pretty soon after that, the schools were separated so that Jewish kids went to different schools from the Aryan kids. Aryans were everybody who wasn't Jewish. But as it turned out, our school was designated as a Jewish school. So all of us, the Jewish kids, were running around the school yelling, "We're throwing out the Aryans, we're throwing out the Aryans." The first swastika season, I was 4. Little biplanes flew over Vienna, and from them colored little paper swastikas fluttered down the petals, like petals in the blossom season. I stuffed my pockets full of blue, pink, orange, thin-angled petals, tried to stuff the glorious carpet of paper petals from the sidewalk all into my pockets. That was a sin. I could see that as soon as I got them home. Mitzi, the maid who had taken me for the walk, laughed, but her laugh was wrong. And Mommy shook me, screamed at Mitzi, picked me up and shook me. The second time those petals came, I never touched one. I was 10 years old and I never touched them. The first swastika season, Daddy held a lawyer's pass to the inner city. We could make our Sunday outing to the palace garden. Daddy had a pass. Young soldiers in pairs led us through. To this pass, only the palace itself was off limits. Still, I tantrumed for my climbing edge along the palace wall. And serenely, his hair shining, his smile shining, Daddy approached the sergeant. "Do you have a little child? What can I do? She always climbs there." The first swastika season, I won. The second time, they bloomed blood red and black, down the buildings, on people's arms, high on the steeples against the sky. I never touched them.
What happened, as things got progressively worse under the Nazis, what happened to the Jewish families?
Well, the men were arrested and sent away to concentration camps. And at first, they were released if they could get papers to get out of the country. But then later on, they weren't. And my uncle, Leo, was sent to Dachau and then to Buchenwald, where he died. And then we had a choice of getting his ashes for nothing or his body for 2,000 mark. And of course sent for the body, but when the casket came, it was sealed and you weren't allowed to open it. And we had a funeral for him, but there's no knowing what was in that casket.
Mom, can you read to us? The next poem I'd like you to read to us. You're describing something called an action. What was that? What was an action?
They were sealing off the apartments, and you were allowed to pack a few things and take them with you, and then you had to leave, and you had to move to a different apartment. And that went on for a while. The men were arrested, and the women and children had to move to somebody else's apartment, and then the apartments were sealed off. Safe house. On the 10th of November, on the day they called Kristallnacht, Mommy was the hero then. Mommy was the hero. We are sealing off apartments. Hurry, hurry with your packing. You must get out. Just a few things. Hurry, we have work to do. And she nodded, ran down cellar, took the lift up to the attic, packed a suitcase and unpacked it, wrapped a compress on her throat, in pajamas in her wrapper, stalled them with her packing, packed and unpacked 7 hours. Yes, the baby's things, you see, Sergeant, the old woman. And my husband should be back now. Maid's gone off now. Such a bother. I myself will go down cellar. One more suitcase, that should do it. Yes, I'll hurry, I will hurry. Till the super came to say it was over, Aktion over. Those downstairs of us were locked out. Those upstairs were saved by Mommy. God, she laughed that night, eyes sparkling, put her clothes on, fed the women who had come to us for refuge, to our safe house, saved by Mommy.
And Mom, you actually were able to leave Austria, but not with your parents. Can you just say a few words about how you left the country?
Yes, there was a transport of 50 children. And we were selected by an American couple and a pediatrician. And they came to the Jewish Community Center where many children came. And they selected 50 of us. and we went on a train.
Mom, do you remember what they asked you in your interview with them?
Yes, there was one. There was a pediatrician with them who actually was German speaking. And are you willing to leave your parents and come with us to America and wait for your parents there? And I said, yes. And after that, no, I think that they said, well, you can think about it for a week and then come back and let us know your answer. And so I went to bed, and I couldn't eat and I couldn't sleep, and I was very upset. And everybody was tiptoeing around me and saying, the poor thing, she has to make this decision, and we've been told we can't decide for her. She has to decide it by herself, and she's been sick ever since. But the reason I was sick, which I never told anybody at the time, was that the minute they told me I could go, I was going. I had no decision to make. I was going. I was going to save my own life, no matter what happened to my parents. And I asked if I could take my sister, but they said no, she's too little. We're not taking any babies. But the reason I was sick was because I was going. And what kind of person was I? I couldn't live with the kind of person I was. And it was true that because I was leaving on different papers, my parents would be more likely to get out because the papers they had to come to America would only have to be for the three of them, because there were papers for all of us.
You came to America with 49 other children.
Yes.
Thank you, Mommy. Thank you so much for telling us your story.
Tonight's featured artist is Elizabeth Edelglass, a fiction writer and book reviewer whose short stories have appeared in Prime Number Magazine, New Haven Review, Lilith, and Tablet, as well as recent anthologies. She has won the Lilith Short Story Contest, the William Saroyan Centennial Prize, the Lawrence Foundation Prize from Michigan Quarterly Review, and an Artist Fellowship from the Connecticut Commission on the Arts. Get ready to hear an excerpt from her story, First They Came for the Torahs, which won the Reynolds Price Fiction Prize and was published in Sixfold. Welcome, Elizabeth Edelglass.
I'm Elizabeth Edelglass, and I'm going to read to you the opening pages of my story, First They Came for the Torahs, with thanks to Sixfold for its publication. These pages present 1 week in a story that takes place over several months. The Torahs were on the floor, naked, sacred scrolls unrolled, one unspooled and oddly twisted, parchment the color of flesh. Like a child splayed across the synagogue's rust-colored carpet, hinting of dried blood. And shards of glass, one stained glass window shattered. Abby knew those windows from a lifetime of bored moments when she should have been praying. Red candlesticks, yellow flames. Now there was a hole she could see through to the street, police cars, lights flashing. The synagogue had been robbed. Had there been sirens in her Sammy's dreams? He'd awakened twice last night crying in his Batman pajamas. Sammy was in kindergarten down the hall in the Jewish day school that now occupied the classrooms where once Abby had spent Sunday school mornings failing to connect Adam and Noah to the weekly Torah portions old Rabbi Gutskind used to read from these very scrolls, now on the floor. She and Doug had wanted something better for their children. Learn to live as Jews, they had read in the day school brochure, members of the global community. Becca was down the hall too, in 3rd grade. In and out, Judy Cohn whispered. They'd made it this far to the sanctuary door only because they were school parents. Nothing so flimsy as yellow crime scene tape could keep mothers from the building where their children were supposed to be safe. For the silver, Judy Cohn said, still whispering. 2 policemen nearby, shifting foot to foot, the creak of leather, the clank of metal. No wonder the Torahs looked naked. Without their silver crowns, meant to exalt, their heavy breastplates, meant to protect. Even the yods were gone, slender silver pointers, each ending in a tiny finger no bigger than Sammy's on the day he was born, to guide the Torah reader, no human finger allowed to touch the sacred parchment. In and out, Judy Cohn repeated. September sun through the gaping window raised a yeasty smell as she leaned in close, hot breath on Abby's ear. I feel, she whispered, almost raped. Sammy was crazed in the car after school. Police cars, he gushed from his safety seat in the back. Sirens. There weren't sirens, Becca said. She too sat in back, still protected in her booster until she turned 9, maybe longer if she didn't put on weight. Don't rush her, Doug always said. Keep her safe a little longer. Were too. Sammy poured out a story about sitting in a police car during recess, sounding the siren. Wee-oo, wee-oo. He made the high-low sound infamous from black and white Gestapo films, as if he knew. Becca covered her ears. I'm the one who found it, Sammy said. Found what? Had Abby been paying attention? The policeman said I shouldn't have touched it. Abby slammed on her brakes as the school bus she'd been mindlessly following suddenly cranked out its stop sign, and a couple of public school kids scuttled safely across the street to their waiting mother. It was so heavy. Found what? Abby saw in the rear view Becca startle at the sharp report of her voice. The flashlight, silly, Sammy said. Becca let that go. No reprimand for calling Mommy silly. Abby searched Becca's face, had to force her eyes back to the curve of road where sometimes deer jumped out. The curve she sometimes took a little too fast, so her kids wouldn't see the occasional dead Bambi on the grassy verge. At dinner, Doug couldn't stop talking about it. His patients had brought the news into his office. It always amazed Abby how people could talk with a dentist's hands in their mouths. It's a ring of thieves, he said. We'll never see that silver again, probably melted down already. Abby kicked him under the table. Her parents had occasionally spoken Yiddish at the dinner table. She had grown up thinking all parents had a secret code, so kids wouldn't hear anything personal, private, scary. Broken Yiddish, it turned out, not code after all, just a remnant of her grandparents' former lives. A robbery, the evening news later confirmed, the kids safely in Becca's room playing Barbies. Not a hate crime, declared the chief of police, his belly filling the TV screen, over a crawl announcing a car crash on the Jersey Turnpike, a car bomb in Iraq. Not a hate crime, Doug snorted. Well, that's a relief. In bed that night, he was strong, and maybe rougher than usual, in and out. Shabbat that week was a makeshift affair, with a Torah borrowed from the shul across town, and an olive wood yard from some congregant's trip to Israel. The Torah sat forlorn in the ark, without silver, which the crosstown shul had not loaned, as if the thieves might come back. That horse is already out of the barn, Abby's mother would have scoffed. Her mother, who had no first-hand experience with horses, but her mother had talked about life before America, before the camps, seemingly bucolic life, before. While Cantor Ken davened shacharit, Judy Cohn leaned forward, curls tickling Abby's cheek. We're putting in a burglar alarm. We have an alarm, Abby said. It didn't help. The boarded-up window glowered at her. At home, Judy said. Who could feel safe anymore? Sammy zipped matchbox cars at Abby's feet, the tiny police car and ambulance he had chosen to bring today. Becca leaned into Abby's side, absorbed in reading Nancy Drew, the same Nancy who'd been solving cases since Abby was her age. Rabbi Wolf held her baby while she chanted from the borrowed Torah, his dimpled finger pointing as if to follow the Hebrew words. Parshat Shoftim. Abby found the English translation in the Bible on her lap, a portion about justice in which crimes must be investigated, as if God knew which words needed to be read this week.
Tonight, our featured artist is Milber Birch, a Grammy-nominated spoken word recording artist, an internationally known storyteller, a published scholar, and a produced playwright. Since 1978, she has performed and taught across the U.S., in Europe, and Asia. Holding a Ph.D. in theater and performance studies from the University of Missouri, she uses storytelling to address social justice issues. Recent notable performances include being a teller-in-residence at the International Storytelling Center in Jonesboro, Tennessee, and returning to the Provincetown Playhouse with an original monologue inspired by Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Susan Glaspell, one of the Playhouse founders. She's also coordinating a virtual storytelling festival at the University of North Carolina for next spring. I'm pleased to welcome Milber Birch.
Battered by the sneering rhetoric of leaders, I fear we'll soon see even the angels crucified. My spirit rises up fierce with prayer, incensed by the silencing of women. The liar's heated words are meant to scald us till we stop reaching out, and the ties between us begin to unravel. We'll sit speechless at the table when beloved friends show us their lacerated hearts and wonder what we should have said. We've lost the skill to comfort even ourselves. So what will we tell our daughters? Will we caution them to be patient, even if the boys aren't kind? Why should they believe us when we urge them to own their power? They have seen for themselves that every fragile thing on earth can be used to feed fiery speech against the other, the smoke of burning flesh obscuring the deception. My children tell me that I can't hold the world's pain inside my body, reminding me that Guan Yin was broken by the endless cries of the world and the burden of all its need. Her human ears were not enough to take in all the weeping, so her head split apart, and on her neck grew a tower of heads, each one supported by the other. Her 2 arms dropped with the weight of all she stooped to carry, till she sprouted 1,000 more to cradle even the least of us. Holding on to her image, I'll step back on the long road to justice. I'll crumble the half a bannock my mother gave me, rationing it piece by piece among my fellow travelers. I'll offer too the blessings she laid upon me, still potent. Those of us who can must move on together, past the fire of our own doubting hearts, past the fear that we aren't worthy, till we reach the haven of our shared humanity, and learn to call it home once more.
Tonight's featured artist, Lauren Frances Sharma, is the author of Book of the Little Axe, the American Library Association's 2020 Libraries Transform Book Pick, and Till the Well Runs Dry, her first novel, which was awarded the 2014 Honor Fiction Prize by the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. Lauren is a contributor to Marita Golden's anthology, Us Against Alzheimer's, and her more recent work can be found at The Lily, the San Francisco Chronicle, electriclit.com, and barrelhouse.com. Lauren is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania and the University of Michigan Law School. She's a McDowell Fellow and the Assistant Director of Breadloaf Writers Conference. It is my great honor to bring to you Lauren Frances Sharma.
Hello, my name is Lauren Frances Sharma. Thank you so much for including me on this wonderful, wonderful project. I wanted to read something about a woman's agency. Scheherazade was a woman of agency, and so I've decided to read a passage from my latest novel, Book of the Little Axe, and it has to do with the agency of my main character, Rosa. It is 1803 in Trinidad, and Rosa is the daughter of a land-owning black man. The British have arrived on the island, and they are now living, this family, the Rendon family, is now living under the threat that they may not be free and that they also may not be able to hold the land that's been in their family. Her father, Damas, has decided that he will marry Rosa off and deed the land to Rosa's husband. So arrangements are made, and Rosa is definitely not thrilled, and uses her agency to express herself. He's arriving at 2 and still you're not dressed, Papa said. Rosa had not wished to be found. She was in the stable wearing her brother's old trousers, preparing her horse, for she had planned not to return home until evening. In the preceding weeks, there had been a flurry of communication between Madame Bernadette and Rosa's parents. Madame Bernadette had told Mama and Papa that her nephew would have been far more keen if we were coming to meet Eve, Rosa's older sister, but said, Rosa will do for now. In anticipation of the meeting, the nephew had asked a schoolteacher from his village to write on his behalf 2 letters of introduction, one to Rosa's father and the other to Rosa, telling of his interests, fishing, carpentry, farming, and wishing to hear more of hers. Rosa never read the letter. Stupidness, she called it. So Mama and Eve responded in her stead. They wrote of Rosa's industriousness, of her brilliance with the horses, of her desire always to learn. Nothing of her beauty, she'd heard Papa asking Mama. It's best if we do not build her up too much, Mama had said. I know Bernadette has given that boy an earful. He needs a wife who can work hard. That's what Rosa can offer him. She's pretty. You know this, see? Rosa had been certain Mama did not see her in this way. As she listened to her parents, she could not recall a moment when her mother regarded her face as though to admire it rather than critique it. Damas, I know how the world sees Rosa. It will do her no good to be told she is lovely here and to be shocked when people do not respond to her in the same way they respond to girls like Eve. Not being prepared for the cruelty of the world can crush a child. Can crush a child. Had crushed a child. The young man arrived promptly with his uncle, Madame Bernadette's eldest brother. The uncle was a hunched man with eyes milky like pearls. He called out before opening the gate, Rendon, we've come. Papa met them at the palms while Rosa watched from the window, the insides of her belly swimming. Papa brought the men to stand before the table, which was well appointed with a white lace cloth and one red bougainvillea centerpiece. Eve had set the table for 5 before leaving. Most Sundays, Eve attended noon mass, but with the church under repair, she was instead sent to lunch with a friend, for it was presumed she would have been a great distraction. Before she departed, however, Eve had fixed Rosa's hair into a ball that sat like a tight, floating fist and helped Mama prepare coconut pone. Eve had also grated fresh ginger into the top of a jar that held 8 servings of ginger beer, peeled potatoes, sliced carrots, collected figs, chopped onions, and cleaned the scales off the fish. The only thing left for Rosa to do was to add water, salt, a dash of pepper sauce, and drop the fish into the pot at precisely the right time to avoid its overcooking. And oh yes, of course, Eve told Rosa she would also be required to smile. Take the apron away from your clothes, Mama whispered, patting down the fly-away strands of Rosa's hair. Rosa shoved the apron beneath the table as Mama took the old man's hand, greeting him as if they were long-ago friends. Mama brought the young man to stand before Rosa, rolling her R, introducing him as Lamech, her French accent perfect for the name's rigid ending. Lamech bowed, his eyes surveying Rosa, as if to seek her approval. Rosa was surprised by this, surprised he had not grimaced or sneered. She suspected that the allure of the land and the sweet neighs of her ponies in the stable made him look kindlier upon her. Pleasure, she said, curtsying, as Mama had asked her to do. Lamech had soft-looking hands, not exactly farmer's hands, and thread-thin lips, and smelled of Bastille soap. He was not an ugly boy, though he looked nothing as Rosa expected. His aunt was a heavy woman with a red-tinted face book-ended by dimples. He, on the other hand, was wiry, his complexion like tea with half milk, and one could not be certain, when taking in his features, if his father was indeed a full Frenchman, for Lamech had a strong, wide nose, a nose Rosa knew would not have been good enough for Mama if he were coming to meet Eve. Sit, s'il vous plaît, Mama, showed Lamech to his seat at the table, Rosa's seat, and offered him a cup of ginger beer and a few slices of ripe mango, while Rosa went to the back of the house to tend to the soup. Rosa hated fish broth. No one had asked what she wanted for lunch, and if they had, fish broth wouldn't have been it. She hated the 2 large potatoes, how long it took the carrots to cool in her spoon. She hated green figs and the fish eyes that every Rendon sucked with fervor. She hated that hot soup could be served on the muggiest day of the year, and hated that this boy man, Lamech, was in her house, in her chair, making ready to eat soup he believed she'd cooked especially for him. Lamech, she said, mocking her mother's French accent. Rosa opened 2 full jars of Mama's homemade pepper sauce, a spoonful of which made grown men wager on who would perspire most, and poured the contents of both jars into the pot, hitting the containers on their bottoms to be certain it was all added. As she brought in the bowls atop a large wooden tray, Rosa overheard her father preparing the guests for a most spectacular meal. Lamech rose to help her. Mama looked on, impressed at the young man's act of benevolence. Rosa could only think what a bore he would be when he overtook their land and took up permanent residence in her chair, pining to sniff Eve's undergarments and bossing Mama as though he actually owned the blessed place. Rosa doled out the broth, placing the spoons next to each bowl, and poured more ginger beer for Lamech and his toothless uncle. No wonder Madame Bernadette had told them to prepare soup. Rosa took Eve's seat across from Lamech, and he watched her as she sat, watched her as she sipped from her cup, watched her as she listened to Papa, who would not stop speaking of the tour of the property they would take after lunch, of how critical Rosa had been to the maintenance of the land, of how much Rosa knew of horses. And Rosa was certain Papa would have continued, except Mama reminded Papa then that the soup before them was growing cold. "Oh, si, a comer, comment, por favor," Papa said. Rosa sipped from the cup again and glanced at Lamech over its rim. He sniffed the contents of the bowl, his eyes narrowing before taking up his spoon, but it was Lamech's pearly-eyed uncle who slurped first.
Tonight's featured artist is Diane Small, a Pysanky or Ukrainian batik eggs artist, a mom of 4, and an avid quilter. Pysanky are made by a process that involves wax, dyes, and real eggshells. Diane creates eggs with traditional, contemporary, and custom designs. She attends a Pysanky retreat yearly to learn from other egg artists. Diane has a bachelor's in science in clothing and textiles apparel design from Virginia Tech and worked in the fashion industry in New York after graduation. She's always had a love for all forms of art and crafts. Making things is Diane's passion. We're thrilled she's sharing her art as part of hashtag 101 Nights. Welcome, Diane Small.
There is an old legend that underscores the power and influence that Ukrainians believe Pysanky have in the world. Far away, it is said, there is a very large and evil monster chained to a cliff. This monster has servants who travel in every country each year, taking account of how many Pysanky have been made for Easter. Each year that fewer eggs have been decorated, the monster's chains are loosened, and there is more evil in the world. If ever there are no Pysanky made, the evil one would be released and he would destroy the world. But in years that many Pysanky are made, the monster's chains are held tight. In those years, the power of love and the goodness that the Pysanky bring is felt throughout all nations, bringing peace and harmony to all.
Tonight, our featured artist is Edwidge Danticat. She is the author of several books, including Breathe Eyes Memory, an Oprah Book Club selection, and Crack, a National Book Award finalist. She's also the editor of The Butterfly's Way, Voices from the Haitian Diaspora in the United States, Best American Essays 2011, Haiti Noir and Haiti Noir 2. Her memoir, Brother, I'm Dying, was a finalist for the National Book Award and winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award for autobiography. She's a 2009 MacArthur Fellow, a 2018 Ford Foundation The Art of Change Fellow, winner of the 2018 Neustadt International Prize and the 2019 St. Louis Literary Award. It's a great honor to bring to the hashtag 101 Nights screen Edwidge Danticat.
Hello, my name is Edwidge Danticat, and I'll be reading a prose poem written by me called Legends. Once upon an endless night, I dreamed of telling you a story, of pleating you a tale out of my breath and carving it into your flesh with my hair. And since the story could be my last, I wanted it to be a perfect story, not perfect in execution, but perfect only in intent. The stories my mother told were always too frightening for us. She worried, my mother did, that I would remember too much. I worry that you will forget. That you will forget nights of women with wings of flames who want to draw you out of your bed and make you into a star. A lovely thing to be a star, you say, but stars are sometimes too far from us, like even Miami to Port-au-Prince. I worry that you will forget nights of galipot, 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 or three-legged horses riding at full speed to either snatch or rescue children who had lost their way. Lost their way from where, you ask? From their country, I say. And what of the children who had no way to lose? And what of the children who had no country? Then the three-legged horses wouldn't want them, I say, because what comes too easy, my mother used to say, nobody wants. What comes too easy does not make legends. Nobody is ever outright handed a pot of gold where we come from, she'd say. We must cross forests, jungles, oceans, unearth the tail end of rainbows. We must vine our hair out of window panes and sleep 100 years. And what if the sleeping beauty never awakens with your secret, with her secret, you ask? Samache, that, my dear, we would call death. In our legends, we are beautiful first. A charmed vision comes to claim us. We go off to the enchanted land. Then we find out that the vision had only barred its face. Still, we are not foolish enough to lie 100 years in wait. Even if they say we are zombies, even if they say we have powders that keep the dead beneath the ground until they jolt awake. And what was that girl, that sleeping beauty I keep hearing about, you say? What was she if not a zombie? And what was it that gave her freedom from the sleeping sickness, if not the taste of salt on the prince's lips? Let no one tell you that it was the man's breath itself. Everyone knows, or at least Mama knows, that it was the salt. It is always the salt. It is the salt that wakes the dead and frightens away the three-legged horses. And it is the salt that brings the children home. Once, while pedaling at a sewing machine under a fan, blowing dust balls into my face, in a crowded castle called a sweatshop. I dreamed of telling you a story. Not like the stories my father told of land invasions and foreign masters, of the Makuts and their eyes which they hid behind X-ray glasses. In my childhood, the Makuts were breeders of night soil who came with their knapsacks for children who did not do as they were told. In your childhood, the Makuts were soldiers transformed by the fears of a madman, whose own mother might have told him to listen in the night for the machetes scraping the palmetto, so he might stay inside. A man who may have watched as the Marines had come to our shores, and as if the constellations of our nights were not deformed enough, now there are breeders of night soil to frighten the adults too, gunboats to replace the knapsacks, bullets to succeed the machetes, and your grandfather's ghost hunting us from a chain gang as he chiseled a song with his fist. Listen, we must not sleep another 100 years and wait for them to come and kiss our lips. Their kisses are not always gentle. They kiss you with their boots over here. And when you awaken, then what? Kisa? Then what? And this is why these stories I dream for you are more yours than mine. One day, there might be time for you to ponder these questions from some office castle or some university tower. Do not forget, please do not forget the three-legged horses. Do not forget the night women and their wings. Do not forget the children lost to the night stars. Do not forget those we have left behind. Mothers who, even as they are standing over their children, are still carving stories into their dreams, stories that they might never be able to tell them, stories that one day they will need interpreters for, stories that you might only acknowledge at last when you read them in a book. My mother's favorite story, an ancient one, 100 years ancient, of a French general once master of the Haitian colony. A French general who gave a massive ball for all the colored women of the capital whose men had been called away. It was the first ball that anyone knew of where so many colored women came, curious by the general's sudden interest in their joy. At midnight, the dancing suddenly stops, and the French general comes, and soldiers dressed in cassocks part a red velvet curtain and chant a mass for the dead. And behind the red velvet curtain are rows and rows of coffins, and the French general names them each one by one to tell the women, "Regarde, you thought you had been dancing the solo minuet all this time, when you were really dancing with your dead men." Perhaps we have all been in the coffins with these men and in the silencing dusk with these women, sleeping away our 100 years of shame, waiting, just waiting for the salt. Once, while cradling someone else's child in my arms, standing at a kitchen stove, stirring a soup for the child's hunger, I dreamed of telling you a story that just rains with salt. I'm telling you to open your mouth and catch as much of the salt as you can. The salt sizzles on your tongue, and suddenly you understand why your mother is Lord Bordelot across the waters. And suddenly you understand why she has crossed these waters, but not the truly endless waters, just a tiny sea, and why this is not the first sea, nor the only sea that we have ever crossed, and why in the mirror you see your mother's face, and in the night you hear your mother's voice drowning out the hum of vacant stars, drowning out the galipot, 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 drowning out the machetes and gunboats, drowning out your tears. And the story my mother likes to tell best is of a mother who every day when she came home from the castle factory would stand outside your bedroom fortress and sing you a simple song. And observing this one day, a devil waited until she was gone and came to your doorstep and tried to imitate the song. At first, the voice was too low, and you knew and did not come. But when your mother sang, you came. When the devil came again with a voice that was too high, you knew and did not come. But when the mother sang, you came. Now I am frightened that you will no longer know your mother's voice. And this is why I am trying to carve all these stories into your dreams, so that you will not be deceived by birds and wolves who want to take you into the night. And this is why I'm trying to carve these stories into your dreams, so that not only will you always remember the sound of your own voice, but mine as well. Once, at least once, each night before I put my head to rest, I dream of telling you a story. I tell you the story, not certain if you will even know how to discern my voice in a place so far from home. I tell you the story, not knowing if you will stay silent or sing it back to me. But I have no choice but to tell you the story. It is all I dream, c'est tout ça me rêver. It is all I know, c'est tout ça me connaît. It is all I have, c'est tout ça me gagne. It is all I am.